Welcome to Indie Film Podcast. This week we're talking DIY sound design for indie film and how to go beyond the bare minimum.
So we'll be discussing some resources and techniques that we've learned, like what does basic sound design include?
Where can I find a free online sound library?
Are those free libraries any good?
How do I get better at indie film sound design?
On that note, I'm Victoria.
And I am Chuck.
We are two indie filmmakers doing our best to make art for little to no budget.
We should talk about film sound and start with George Lucas, I think.
Oh, because George Lucas has a fun quote about this.
He does, and we couldn't actually verify the interview that he had said quote, but it is, the sound and music are 50% of the entertainment of a movie. And variations of those you can find online. And sometimes that is forgotten with indie filmmakers because most of your efforts are putting the picture in the frame.
As I heard it said once, sound design is the redheaded stepchild of indie film. And I decided to not be offended by this, but I have heard it phrased that, and I did find it a little bit entertaining.
Well, as a location sound recordist and sound mixer, I'm offended by your comment.
You'd rather be a location sound recordist than a redheaded stepchild?
Yeah, please don't compare us. So,
thanks.
should we talk about an example or some examples?
Yeah, actually, you had a fantastic example for this.
Yes, famous trilogy that was recorded in Italy, the Dollar Trilogy. This is Clint Eastwood's role that made him famous, I believe, because he was doing like Western TV shows prior to these spaghetti Westerns. So the Dollar Trilogy is A Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollar More, and then The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, which The Good and the Bad and the Ugly was the most famous of the trilogies.
Yeah, I have not heard of the other two.
Okay, well, anyway, the movies are great. I actually just watched them for the first time probably about a month ago, but the sound is rough. They were filmed MOS, which I had to look this up before this podcast. It stands for Mit Out Sound, and I guess it's a German phrase because otherwise it would be WOS without sound, but it's Mit Out Sound. And these films were clearly foleyed and ADR'd all the way through. And going back, or excuse me, not going back, but watching these for the first time, having grown used to really solid location sound in most of the films that I do consume. These ones were clearly the actors were speaking whatever their native language was. So obviously Clint Eastwood was speaking English, and then you could see people mouthing words in either Spanish or Italian because these were filmed in Italy and Spain.
So did they all just have their own version of the script that was in their own native language, and they just kind of rolled with it, and everyone just had to assume that they were saying the right line because nobody was actually trilingual?
I don't know, actually. But there are very clearly scenes where people are speaking not English, and then they ADR'd the English lines over the top of the actors.
Which always looks very convincing.
Yes.
They do that with a lot of Netflix movies nowadays, too.
Or famously Godzilla movies. Yeah, so it was a little bit hard to watch those films because the sound was distracting, and obviously then any of the ambient sounds and any of the foley sounds like doors opening and footsteps were a little bit eerie, like they were just too much,
just not quite right.
Yeah But the movies themselves were great, like great story, great motivation for characters, but location sound was non-existent, and overall sound mixing was a little bit rough.
No, that's kind of sad.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So sound does matter. And I think the biggest takeaway from that kind of sounds like, sound has always been a struggle. This isn't new. Everybody worries about this. Everybody has, some highs and some lows on location sound capture as well as mixing. So you know what? That's actually a little validating.
Should we dive into it then?
Yeah, let's go for it. Because I want to go into your really fun comparison. Because you compared film to music.
Yes,
I liked this.
I did write a quick comparison. So comparing film to music, sound is kind of like the rhythm section of your movie. And the visuals is more like vocals or lead guitar or whatever the lead instrument is. And sometimes you can get overly fixated on the visuals, but if you don't have a good rhythm section, your band is not going to be very good. Right?
It may not be what everybody notices, but you notice.
Exactly. If you're not tapping your foot to the beat, or whatever it is, if you don't have the supporting role of the musicians there, like your lead singer is not going to be all that impressive.
No.
But also your lead singer will be even more impressive with the right backing band. In my experience.
No, it's true. I'm thinking to Rockapella when they finally got their rhythm vocalist, which is an acapella band, if you couldn't tell by the name Rockapella. So once they got rhythm, like a rhythm section, just a guy who can do like the beatboxing with his mouth. I won't attempt to do that as a favor to everyone.
Neither will I.
But yeah, once they got him in, then it all changed.
It took off.
It did.
People appreciated it more.
Yeah. Well, then they landed the gig for the Carmen Sandiego theme song, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, so I actually do know this band.
You actually do know
and
this band.
Most people do out there.
Yep.
So it was the beatboxer that made them.
I mean, they were
famous.
already really talented, but I'm gonna say that having a rhythm section probably helped substantially.
Yeah, so get that sound section in your films, and it's definitely going to help out. We should probably talk about some free sound effects libraries. I will say having a gigantic library of sound effects available to me when I'm doing post audio has changed everything as far as the quality that I'm able to create just on my own.
Yeah.
And I've done some gigs where it's the location sound where I've recorded it, and it hasn't quite been ideal. I've done gigs where I'm mixing sound for some really awesome location sound recordists, and it made it a lot easier, but I still had to lean heavily into my sound effects library. And then I've also done some gigs where I was helping filmmakers fix movies where they had a friend running boom that day, which if you're an indie filmmaker and you've done some 48-hour film festivals, or you're just trying to get something done, you've been in that situation where you're like, we can't find any sound person. We're just going to get a set of headphones, a cheap Zoom recorder, and whatever mic we can find, and give it to this person and be like, hey, record this.
Who's
and
probably going to be ex cast member or ex crew member's child or niece or nephew or something like that, because they are going to be able to just drag them along against their will to set and make them hold a boom all day.
Yes. Poor kids.
Yes.
And poor people. It hurts your shoulders, I'm going to say that.
It can be exhausting.
There's techniques, and if you're running boom, look it up online. There are techniques that's helped me when I'm on set, because some of those long takes, it destroys your shoulders if you're not careful.
It's bad.
So free sound effects. You can obviously go online and purchase a lot of them. That's what I ended up doing. Is I got a collection that was not all that cheap, but at the same time, the clarity is amazing. One place that I used to go quite a bit was freesound.org.
Yeah.
That one's great. And there's a lot of different, it's searchable. You have to create an account, and a lot of the sounds do require some attribution. Some of them are just like open to the public. And I have gone into those sound effects libraries if I'm missing something and picked one of those up. And, as a favor, I kind of do like the need a penny, take a penny, have a penny, give a penny. So when I do get my own location sound effects or my own foley, I'll throw them up onto freesound.org, and then as an exchange for like some of the people that I've downloaded from that are, just open, free to the public, which is pretty cool.
That's really nice, though. And I guess that's actually probably how that library has been built out, is a lot of people feeling sort of that same moral obligation to contribute.
Yes.
Nice.
I would imagine. But they have a really great listing of sounds, or a great library of sounds on that website, and it's just kind of all user generated. And so the sampling, being able to listen on the fly is really good. And I've pulled some excellent sound effects from that library.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
that's a good sign.
That's kind of the only one on this list that we made that I have experience with, because we were looking at Zapsplat.
Zapsplat actually looked pretty good. I've got some experience with a couple of these.
Okay.
So Zapsplat was just very popular and very highly suggested. And then looking at the website, it actually does look pretty good. It looks like you have to add some sort of attribution in your credits when you use stuff from there, but you can pay for it and then you don't have to. So you've got some options. The BBC Sound Effects Archive, you've actually brought that one up before.
Yeah, the BBC it's kind of famous if you're in online or Reddit groups that discuss audio. The issue there is if you're a nonprofit or if you're using it for public television, then you can use them. But if you're creating your own work or you're doing commercial work, then it's going to be limited as far as the usage.
Oh, so good for students.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a good one. You just look at what their limitations are. And I should preface this by saying I have not used any sound effects of my own for commercial work. Like if I'm doing a commercial versus narrative artwork, if that makes sense. And so those you have to be really careful if like you're doing something that's advertising, because those are going to be separated out on a lot of the sound effects libraries. Like if you're doing this for like commercial work or commercial for a company, yada yada yada.
Look at the license you are purchasing to make sure it covers your specific use case.
Yeah, exactly. And so large tech firm where I worked previously, they had their own sound effect and music library that we were limited to using for their commercial productions.
Because that's what they've paid for and own in perpetuity and whatnot.
Exactly. So,
especially since they were still are an international organization.
Yeah.
Which also adds some complexities.
I bet. Talk to the legal department.
It's fine. Everybody loves talking to the legal department at a giant global corporation. YouTube audio library I've used a couple of times for little shorts.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the music on there is actually completely palatable.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm not going to say that it's the best. I'm not going to say you should necessarily lean into any of the songs with lyrics.
Okay.
Some of them, and maybe this was years ago. So if you're a YouTube music creator, sorry, maybe I just didn't see your stuff. But some of it can be a little out there.
Okay.
I remember quite a few synthesized banjos, which was
nice.
Which was new.
Okay.
So I don't know if I'd recommend it, but hey, it's there and it's available, and
if
you can
it
use it.
if it fits your project, if you need some synth banjo, which I actually didn't know that was a thing, so maybe I'll create a movie around a synth banjo so that it does fit.
Like where it like sounded like somebody had just a digital keyboard, but instead of playing a keyboard noise, it made a banjo noise.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah,
MIDI banjo.
Oh, MIDI banjo is probably how that. This is why I don't do sound stuff. Okay, so
right on.
The next one I actually do have a fair amount of experience with is Audionautics.
Got it.
And that one is apparently mainly, or just, I can't really tell, the musician Jason Shaw.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool. But as long as you throw something in your credits that says, additional music from audionautics.com, or maybe it's updated now that you could say Jason Shaw. I used some of his music 3 years ago now, so it was a hot minute. But it's actually really good music. It does sound really good.
Oh, right on.
I liked that.
MobyGratis.com just reopened. So the musician Moby, you can download a whole bunch of his tracks that he recorded. And this one is pretty solid. I started to dig around in there, and the nice thing is that he has the stems that you can download. So if you're unfamiliar what stems are, it means that he has his music that you can download the tracks. They're 2-3 minutes, and there are some restrictions on there. Just go to the website, check it out. But for each song, or for most of the songs that he's uploaded, you can download each individual musical part and then use just that stem for something. So like if you just want the bass line, or you just want the guitar part, or you just want the drums, you can take those parts out individually and then kind of build your own.
Oh, that's really cool. So that way if you wanted to have people like listening to a song inside and like a club, and then suddenly you're outside and you just hear the bass line coming through the walls or something, you can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, that would definitely help for that.
That's cool.
So while we're on the subject of music, I'm going to jump around a little bit, because music is obviously something super important to make an indie film sound great.
Yeah.
And one of the hacks that we learned early on at Lower Gentry Studios was to film musicians live. We actually started in this space. If you're watching us on YouTube, we did kind of like an NPR Tiny Desk-ish music series called Treasure Valley Live, we would bring bands in and we basically just kind of like film them. They were happy to have the video assets. We were happy to have the practice. And then we had like a YouTube channel around that for a while. And it was great to get in contact with these bands because after we built a relationship with them, there were a lot of them that were willing to share their albums for our projects, which if you try to compose something, that's a lot of work. If you are friends with a group of musicians, then they are most likely going to have a high quality EP or LP available. And if you put that in your indie film versus trying to compose something or pay somebody to compose something, it's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be way more expensive and the results might not be what you expect.
Yeah.
So if you're in a city that has a decent music presence, I think it's really important to just listen to all the local musicians' music, find some stuff that fits your project, and instead of going the composition route, just start there.
I'm also going to throw out there is a very popular AI music creation tool that will make you a song. It'll either make up the lyrics for you or you can put your own in there. And I would second Chuck on this one and say, go talk to a band before you do that.
Yeah. They know what they're doing musically.
They do. And the AI just isn't 100% there yet. Maybe for some of the non-vocalized thing, but I think you should just talk to the real band. Lean into the musicians that are doing what they love because the passion really shows in music.
It does.
It does.
And it stands out. It makes your short film instantly better if you have a track that hits really hard. So, should we talk about the mixing techniques?
Yeah, actually, I was just going to ask if you would be so kind as to walk through maybe some of the less expensive tools, right? Because we know that the Pro Tools is probably out of budget for a lot of indie filmmakers and maybe even just overkill in some cases. So what are some tools other than Pro Tools that you would suggest using?
So I've actually never used Pro Tools before because it is very expensive. Yeah. And as a production company, small production company, we've always used Premiere to edit our films. And so obviously Audition communicates directly with Premiere Pro, and it's really easy. You can actually just take your Premiere Pro project and open it in Audition.
Which is wild. That was a mind-blowing thing that you taught me.
Yeah, it makes it much easier to communicate. Then it's pointing at the files, and you don't have to do like kicking out stems, and you have access to the entire audio file then a lot more easily. However it's set up on with whomever edited it. You just have to make sure you only get one video track, so you just have to make sure that you export the video only on Premiere Pro, and then you can slam that into the Audition video track, and it keeps all the multi-track audio. So definitely recommend Audition if you're working with Premiere. I've heard good things about DaVinci Resolve. I've never edited audio in DaVinci Resolve, and the only reason for that is because I did not like their audio cleanup for dialogue, and that was kind of something that I use all the time. However, I recently switched to iZotope RX, which is a plugin. And it works phenomenally.
A plugin for Audition?
It's a plugin for any DAW, which is a digital audio workstation. So it works in Premiere, it works in DaVinci, and it basically gives you like a live monitoring of dialogue cleanup.
Ooh.
So it has a lot of different tools in there. You know, like if you have noisy dialogue, it'll isolate the dialogue. If there's a lot of room reverb, it'll take care of that. If you get some hard S's, like I'm probably blowing out people's ears, but it'll fix that in the EQ. They're all separate plugins. They're a little heavy on your processor, oddly enough. So even if your computer runs video processing pretty well, some of these audio plugins aren't optimized for multi-core processors. And so when you run them, it can kind of lag your system down, which is really strange when you're working with audio, but it's especially if you have a system that can deal with, like 6K B-raw footage, and then you go to like put a dialogue cleanup on a track and you're like, why is this running so slow? It happens. So
don't do it at the same time you're filing your taxes.
No.
Okay.
That would be a bad move for sure.
Got it.
So anyway, as far as recommending people, if you're already working in a non-linear editor, like if you're working in Premiere Pro, just use that. I know I looked up Audacity's free online. I've used Audacity like way back years ago, but
yeah, I remember Audacity used to be like the go-to for it was up there with DaVinci. Like if you wanted a free solution, you went with Audacity.
yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend doing that. I would rather edit my audio in Premiere Pro than edit it in Audacity because you already have everything there.
No,
so
that's fair. Okay, how about walking us through some of the basic steps that you do as far as actual cleanup goes? Because I know we did one episode where you covered just the basics, but can you kind of walk us through in more detail what it looks like?
Absolutely. So as soon as I get the project from my brother usually, or whomever edited the project, I'll open it up in Audition, which fortunately most of the people I work with edit in either DaVinci or Premiere Pro. Easy to open it then in Audition. And when you're working with somebody that just does video editing, normally you see whatever audio was recorded with the corresponding video, which usually it's a boom mic. Sometimes it's a boom mic and a couple of lavs. And so it could be one track, it could be multiple tracks, but it's just the audio taken from that frame, from that take, from that shot.
Okay.
And my goal is to make that audio as clean as possible and also make that audio as consistent as possible between shots. Because the first thing as a viewer that's going to pull you away from watching a film is to have those hard, janky noises in between shots where it's this shot is completely clean. This shot you can hear the camera fan running.
Because you had to have your boom operator closer to the camera for whatever reason.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that all of that stuff is clean. It's not very often that I completely silence tracks, but if you're getting a close up and it's nobody talking and maybe somebody's just like tapping their finger on the table and you get a close-up shot of that. They tried to get location sound, but the camera fan was running and the mic was very close to the sound source and the camera fan. It's like, well, it's quicker for me just to mute that and put some tapping sounds in, foleyed, rather than try to clean all that stuff up. But there's ways to do that. So my first goal is to just get a clean dialogue track. And what I actually do is I remove as much of the room tone as possible from everybody's dialogue. And this is something that I do myself, and I'm not trained in any type of by any production company. I'm completely self-taught, but I have my own room tone that's a stereo recording. And a stereo recording doesn't fight with a dialogue track as much because the dialogue track is mono.
Okay.
And so room tone, when it's coming from the left and the right channels, it's not filling both channels at the same time all the time, whereas the dialogue comes out both left and right.
Okay.
So it allows me to turn up that room tone a little bit louder since it's varying between left and right channels and can help me cover up more mistakes.
Oh, nice.
That happened during the recording process. So, or not mistakes, but just random noises that pop up.
Yeah. Some of the fridge hum HVAC stuff, like little things going on in the background if you can't completely get rid of them.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
If they're there, then that's when I start masking. If it's because you don't want to ADR. You want to avoid ADR as much as possible because it's hard to do.
Yeah.
It's hard to get it to sound natural. It's hard to get the actors to repeat their lines in an exact way that they did it on set.
Well, not to mention the fact that since we're talking indie film here, it's not budget friendly to have to ADR a bunch of stuff.
True.
It's a lot of extra time for people.
It is. It's an enormous amount of time for them to have to repeat their lines. So assuming that you're trying to avoid ADR, the next step is to just layer in ambient sound. So I had mentioned I have a stereo room tone that I use. And what I'll do is on the dialogue track, I always crossfade on all the dialogue tracks.
What does that mean?
Which means in between each shot, you're going to have a hard cut of audio. And hopefully nobody was saying anything with enough space after one shot and before the next shot, because I crossfade that audio so that it goes from one to the next rather than having a hard cut. In audio, you always want to be giving it an extra like second if you have it on one end, extend each shot into the next. Extend the audio from each shot into the next, or pull it so that it goes into the shot before. And what that does is it helps you avoid those sharp audio changes. And super important to do that.
So, of course, I'm going to sidetrack you.
Sure.
So in the case where you have maybe an L cut or a J cut over that.
Yeah.
Like over and during a line.
Yeah.
So then you would just move that crossfade back to the beginning of that actual audio cut, even if the image hasn't changed.
Yep.
Sorry. Okay. Or after the image changes. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm talking strictly audio. It doesn't matter what the visual's doing, because yes, if you're doing hard, or you're doing L cuts or J cuts, or you're throwing an insert shot where people are talking and you're not using any audio from that insert shot, that's not as important as those audio cuts.
Okay.
Because a hard cut in video works
sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you have a match on action, like you can do it.
Yeah.
But a hard cut on audio can be very jarring.
Fair.
And so you always want to fade it in. And even if you have some areas, let's say that you have the director yelling, cut or action, but that part of the take is actually on the shot. If you have to cut that audio out, you still want to slowly fade that audio in from nothing. You don't want to have the audio just start out of nowhere. You always should be fading it. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I always fade it because it's going to be less noticeable that way.
Yeah.
So that said, once you get all the fades in so that it sounds decent, I start to layer in ambience. And I try to do, I've mentioned this before, I try to do a few tracks of ambience throughout the movie as much as possible. And I'll add even more tracks of ambience if the scene is noisier.
So can you give an example of what you mean by a few? Because I can imagine I myself would be like, oh, great. I have some room tone and then I've got just like a light buzz. Perfect. There's a few.
Yes. I mean, you can add more. So for example, your short film Dive, it took place in a dive bar. There were a lot of refrigerators. And what I did was I had the room tone. The scene started outside. And so I had cricket noises going much more loudly on the outside scenes.
Yeah.
But then what I did was I carried that in to the bar along with the buzz from the light source. So outside, the intro, it apexed with all the sounds, the cacophony of sounds, which was crickets chirping, outdoor noise. I still had my room tone in there, which is very warm, and you can just kind of use it throughout the entire track. I just turn it down when it's outside, and then the buzz from the light was going.
Okay.
As soon as I went indoors, what I did was I just lowered the volume on all those. And then this other trick is called a low pass. And so if you listen to music that's happening in another room, you can just hear the bass, right?
Yeah.
So you can do that with the EQ on the ambience as well. So if there's something happening outside, you just take and turn down all the high frequencies so that you're left with the low frequencies. And then you leave that going in the background and the audience just kind of accepts that that's an outside noise for the most part.
So flashing back to several episodes ago when you mentioned, for example, if you have construction noise you're trying to shoot around.
Yes.
And you have an establishing shot outside of this construction noise, then maybe if you can isolate some of those noises, I don't know what construction things are called, but as those machines move.
Big cats.
Big cats, sure. Let's roll with that one because I don't know. It's not a backhoe, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, so you could take those sounds and take out those higher frequencies to sort of not only dull the noise that you couldn't get rid of in the first place, but also just add to the fact that it's outside.
Yes, absolutely. And inserting some of that noise too when you need to. So if there is some really janky cuts in the movie and dialogue that you can't quite clean, and even with the crossfade, like you notice like this sharp increase in ambient noise.
Yeah.
What I'll do, for example, like if we have a scene outside that starts out outside, I'll have just the sound of traffic driving by. Nobody notices that there's a traffic sound, like just car rolling on the street. And then when they get inside, I'll just do the low frequencies of the car rolling through the street, establish that. And then when I have a very strange, janky audio cut that I can't fix, I'll just layer in a car driving by right at that cut.
Oh, that's smart.
And then it'll just kind of mask whatever audio issue I'm having for that, brief.
It gives you another excuse to cover it up. Oh, that's brilliant.
Well, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
So that's what I do there. And then once the ambience is laid in, go through and just fill in all the sound effects that you need to, whether it be footsteps or staplers.
Your favorite?
A stapler, yes. That's something that I did in the first feature film is I used a staple sound effect in almost every single scene.
Yes.
But like, for example, on Dive, I got location sound, which I ended up using as Foley of the actor pouring the drink. Mm-hmm. And so when we were in between takes, I was sure to get clean audio of that. And I used that most like over and over again because a lot of times the location sound, when you were cutting in between shots, he was still pouring.
Yeah.
But there wasn't enough pouring there.
No.
So, carefully like layering those sound effects in so that it sounds natural and nothing's janky.
Which was impressive, actually, because the pour always just sounded very clear and good. So
yeah, you just insert it. You make sure you get a really long one, and then sometimes you just have to crossfade in between it so it just sounds like it keeps going. Yeah. And that's why you want to make sure that you have a long enough
really
take.
Smart.
Yeah, if you want to make sure you have a long enough take so that you can, if you need to repeat the same sound, it doesn't sound like it's like coming out of a loop station or something.
Yeah.
Because if it's too short of a sample, it starts to sound like music. If it's only like a couple seconds long and you're replaying it and replaying it and replaying it, like it has a sense of rhythm to it, and then it's unnatural. So you want to make sure you get, a good chunk of time if you're going to take something and then repeat it over and over again.
No, that's a good point. And maybe cap it at a certain point. Maybe don't reuse it more than 7-8 times.
Yeah, it helps because the audience might recognize it at that point. So, and then the last step is I usually mix the music in, which on Diva that was which I'm pretty sure I talked about before. We had the speaker system, and that was part of the ambience was to have music playing like it sounded it was coming from a crappy speaker inside the bar.
Yeah,
and
which was perfect.
And that
very Dive bar.
Exactly, and that helps cover up a lot of mistakes too, or audio issues that are really difficult to clean up. Yeah. It's just kind of like the path of least resistance. So there we go. That's what I would do.
That's the in-depth walkthrough from Chuck of Lower Gentry Studios and Chuck's Media. Not Chuck Media. Chuck Media would be a different thing.
Well, there's no apostrophe, so it's just Chuck's. But it's I am the Chuck.
Wait, Chuck's Media is just CHUCKS?
Yeah, I didn't put an apostrophe on it when I claimed the LLC, so it's...
Intentionally, or...?
I just didn't know that you could put an apostrophe. I just assumed that you couldn't. But you can.
Because Arby's is just an S, right?
Yeah, exactly. Arby is the main guy. Arby is the main...
It's just how many Chucks are in Chuck's Media. All of them. All of the Chucks.
Anybody's welcome. Any Chucks.
Perfect.
Excellent. So I think we had one more segment here, workflow tips. That actually kind of...
Yeah, it's like, honestly, you covered most of that. The only thing that you didn't go into a lot of detail on was labeling your audio files. So if you have any tips or tricks for that.
Oh, definitely put as many details into your audio file as possible.
Oh my gosh, I have one for this.
You do?
I do. So whenever I'm labeling any of my footage, I found out recently, I need to make sure I keep some information about the original file name and rename it only within my editing system.
Oh,
so
nice.
Now I rename all my files, like, scene whatever, shot whatever, take whatever. And then I'll put an underscore, and then whatever that unique identifier on the original file name was, I leave that alone on my footage and my audio.
Okay.
Unless I need to label, like add an additional like lav A or boom 2, or I don't know what you would use that for, but you might. But that way, if you ever have to hand it off to somebody else and they have a copy of the footage as opposed to the exact same folder that you do, then they can still relink all the footage because it has that unique identifier in the name. So I actually have a tip for that.
Well, that's good.
Because it came up twice recently.
So don't change the file names of your footage, you're saying?
Yeah, when you cannot change the file names, just change it in Premiere or whatever editing suite. Don't actually change the file name, but if you have to change the file name, keep the unique identifier on your audio and your video.
Nice.
Yeah.
I dig that. One thing that I will add to that exact same scenario is if you're opening a file in your audio workstation, some of them, I know Audition does for sure, if you go in and modify the actual WAV file itself, it will save it to the WAV file that it's referencing. So when I'm pulling from my library of sound effects, I always make a duplicate copy of whatever sound effect I'm going to use inside of the project folder itself. So I create a separate sound effects folder inside of the project. That way I make sure I don't accidentally, like if I'm trying to take a footstep and it's a like a very tall person, I might pitch it down a little bit just to give it kind of like make it feel like it's coming from somebody that's larger versus like if it's a child, you want to like pitch it up.
Yeah.
It works, just something simple as that, but it'll potentially write that to the file depending on how you mess with it. So if you like actually open the WAV file, which if you're sampling, it can do that. Like if you slow down the file to make it actually last longer or like speed it up, it might save it to the file. So always move those sound effects that you've collected, duplicate them, and then put them in that other folder so that you don't accidentally ruin one of your files that you've
Worked
downloaded.
so hard to get and might never be able to find ever again.
Exactly. So,
Nice.
There we go.
Very smart.
That's
Very
all I got for
smart
tips.
choice. Okay.
So shall we end succinctly?
I'll try.
Goodbye.
Bye.